Mm, All right, we are live. Welcome to this live Google Plus Hangout with the UNIV200 Living the Dreams instructors and the wonderful folks just around the corner physically from me in the VCU Writing Center. Today we'll be talking about what the VCU Writing Center can do with and for the students in the UNIV 200 Digital Engagement Pilot and transition from there into a little bit about logic, argumentation, and all the good stuff that our students will be doing for their final inquiry projects. So with that introduction, I will hand it over to Philip from the VCU Writing Center, who's going to get us started with an understanding of what they do over there and what they can do with our students. Philip?
All right, hello everyone. My name is Philip Vaughn. I'm one of the Writing Center consultants here at VCU, and I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about what we offer. Primarily, we have conversations with students so we can help them throughout the writing process, from brainstorming, revision, research, pretty all parts of it. And we just like to sit down with students and figure out where they're at and figure out how to get them to where they're going. So nothing super fancy, but everything that we do is very constructive, and gotten a lot of great feedback from students across many different disciplines and across all levels, from undergrad to graduate students as well. So it's primarily what we do here. Do you want to talk about the hour, Sarah?
I sure can. My name is Sarah Bailey. I work at the Writing Center as well. We're here to serve you between 12 and 6 on Mondays through Thursdays. And at this time, you need to call 828-4851, right? Yes. Again, 828-4851 to schedule an appointment, or you can walk in. Again, if you can tell us what exactly you're working on, that's great, and then we can better tailor it to your needs. And as well as non-academic papers. We do everything from dissertations to your UNIV projects, scholarship essays, personal statements, all kinds of stuff. However, although we know that your professors have required to come meet with us, you should probably call sooner rather than later, because time will be of the essence and spots will start to fill up. Also, we now have online appointments available through Google Hangouts. Philip, do you want to talk to him about how that works?
I will talk to them about how that works. So with our new online appointments, you will utilize the Google Plus account that is synced up with your mymail.vcu.edu account. So you will need to activate that. So if you know you're going to need an online consultation, you can go ahead and get that done at any time. Also, you will need to upload your document to Google Drive, not as a Word document, but as an actual Google document. And then you'll need to share the drive with the 3 accounts that we have here at the Writing Center. Once you set up your online appointment, you'll get all the instructions listed in the email, so I won't give them all to you now, but I will just give you an overview of that process. So you activate your Google Plus, upload your document to Google Drive, share your document with the 3 accounts that we have, and then ensure that you have a stable internet connection and working webcam and microphone. Once you get that done, all you have to do is sign on a little bit before your scheduled appointment time. Your consultant will send you a direct link to the Google Hangout from one of the 3 Writing Center accounts that we have, and then you'll go ahead and get started. And then essentially it will run very much like the live Google Hangout that we're doing now, with the added functionality of being able to edit your documents in real time on Google Drive.
So what if they're not using a document? You know, what if it's a little more link-oriented?
Gotcha. The other cool thing about using Google Hangout is that you can also do screen share, so you don't even have to type the link in and wait for the other person to go to it. You can just screen share and show them what you're looking at online. The consultant can also pull up websites, so if they want to show you something on Purdue OWL, which is a great writing resource that a lot of our consultants utilize, or if there's a specific article that's pertinent to the paper that you're working on that they don't want to type the full name into and it's quicker to show it to you, you can use the screen share for that. Additionally, if you don't have any writing done, you can use and create a Google Drive document and then do some brainstorming in there. So again, you don't have to have anything written to do an online consultation. You just have to be online and available, and we'll still be able to provide all the services that we provide in-house.
Also, you might want to pay attention to when your assignment is due. It's best to come in before it's due, especially days before, and then that way if we have things to tell you about revising and maybe some suggestions, you'll be able to implement those before the actual project is due.
Yes, and then the other thing that I would like to note is that you do need to schedule your online consultations at least 1 hour in advance. That is because we want to give you enough time to get your documents uploaded and get yourself a stable internet connection. So you won't be able to schedule an online consultation at 3 o'clock. At 2:15, you will need to schedule that at least at 2 o'clock, and that's just to make sure that everything can be up and running at that time.
I think that's all we have for you, unless you'd, if you guys have anything else for us to say about it.
Okay. No.
Just go ahead, Jessica.
All right. So I guess we'll sort of segue now into the second part of this Google Hangout. So we're going to talk a bit about argument now and the structure of argument, because all of you guys, all of our students right now are in the process of crafting their arguments, or they're about to start to craft their arguments in the coming days. So we want to sort of engage the Writing Center instructors and each other as faculty in a conversation about what makes for a good argument, and then talk specifically about a few elements of argument that we know that all writers struggle with, specifically with how to craft a good main claim, and this claim, reason, evidence sort of formula that the Writing Center often teaches and that we teach in the 200 class as a whole. So maybe I'll ask you guys, any of you, Writing Center peeps or faculty, what can we tell our students about main claims? What's a good way some good advice we can give them about formulating a strong main claim for their argument?
Well, one of the things that I know I like to share with students is that a main claim does need to be specific, not extremely specific, but it needs to, ask a question that can be answered or make a statement that can be challenged. You can't just say, I want to look up euthanasia. It's a very big topic. You can narrow that down a lot further. So you need to at least know the topic area that you want to go into and some of the other sub areas that you would be interested in researching and then developing an argument about.
Okay. Anyone else want to add anything to that?
Also, you want to pick like an overarching claim to start your piece. You want to have an argument that you can also make multiple arguments for. So it has to have a big enough scope to where, regardless of where you zoom in and make your subclaims, that those are still tenable to your main claim or your thesis.
Mm-hmm. So I always tell my students that there's two main functions of a good of any main claim. One is to state your stance in the argument, not just this is my topic, but specifically what is your stance in that argument. And the other is to kind of map out or to provide a map of what that argument is going to look like on paper. And I know different teachers approach that second part in different ways, so I'm only speaking for myself here. But I ask students to tell us what your stance is on this argument, and then also tell us give us an image of what this is going to look like in your argument so that we know what to expect as readers as we go through. Now, a really simplistic way to go about that would be to just list your main claims. I believe this because here's my first, here's my second. You don't want to just list off your subclaims, but that's a good way to get started to think about, what is that order of your project going to look like? And the other thing I'd say is that what's really important to remember about crafting a strong main claim is that you have to revise it again and again and again. Sure, you have to start with something. You've got to have that sentence that sort of says this is what my project is about before you can start to write your argument. But for most writers, maybe for all writers, well, for myself, when I go to write an argument, I end up changing my mind over and over again as I'm writing. I come up with better ideas. I shift the order or the sequence of the different arguments that I'm making, and I add completely new arguments in that I had not even imagined before I began to write. And because that's a natural part of the writing process, it's really important to go back at the end and make sure your main claim still reflects the argument you've actually written. I don't know. What would the rest of you say about that?
I would definitely agree with that, and to piggyback off of it, you want to make sure that when you're doing your research and investigating the argument or the question that you're trying to answer, that you don't go with a particular destination in mind, because a lot of times you will lose that ability to change what you're looking for or to be open to new ideas or to expand what you're originally writing about if you already know, oh, I'm going to look at this one thing, this is the answer I'm going to argue for, and that's the end of the story. So like knowing just the topic area is great, knowing kind of where you want to end up is fine, but being stuck on it is where a problem where a lot of writers have. So you need to be open to the new ideas that can develop throughout the research and writing process.
Mm-hmm. Ed.
Yeah, just to maybe add a little levity. So, the movie that's coming to mind is a classic, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. And so, if you've not seen it, Steve Martin and John Candy end up on this kind of harrowing experience. And there's an earlier scene where they're sitting on a plane together, and John Candy's babbling away, and Steve Martin, who plays the straight guy, just can't stand him. And then later in the movie, Steve Martin just kind of lets John Candy have it, and he's just going on and on about what a miserable person John Candy is. And at some point he says to him, you know, when your passenger next to you starts reading the barf bag, you know, take a hint. And he says, and when you're telling a story, here's an idea, have a point. And so that's kind of when I don't know that I think about it as a main claim as kind of, what's your point? Like, what point are you trying to make in this argument? And you should be able to state that essentially in a sentence or two. And so that's kind of how I think about a main claim. What point are you trying to make here?
And I think I would add too, because this should be an argument, the main claim shouldn't just be a statement, a point, you know, a fact, or something that's not debatable. I mean, students should be able to articulate a claim that they can imagine someone else arguing against, even if it's not, you know, specifically opposite of what their claim is. They know from doing the research that they've been doing the last few weeks, they know that there are a lot of perspectives out there, and their claim is going to just articulate, you know, their position, and they can imagine that, because they've done some reading and research, they can imagine that there are other researchers out there or other readers out there who may disagree with the claim, because there should be, you know, some. If you're writing an argument, there should be some opposition somewhere to that argument, so that you know, it's not just. Otherwise, students sometimes will just write an informative paper, or you'll ask them, you know, what are your goals in the paper? Well, I just want to inform my reader, and I've always tried to encourage students that they're doing more than informing the reader. Or at least challenging the reader to look at something in a new way, or asking the reader to question certain assumptions. So they're doing more than just providing information. Would you guys agree?
I would definitely agree. And one of the things I learned in my researching class was the Hegelian dialectic and how to apply that, where you have the claim, counterclaim, and synthesis of both claims. So you can still point out your opposition, and actually finding middle ground is a good way to end an argument, saying that you actually improve the argument itself because you can meet what both sides are struggling with.
Yeah.
For me, so I'd be interested in hearing from the folks that have taught UNIV200 before. What is an argument?
I would have to argue that. See, I have to say that the argument itself is a belief for some people. For other people, it's just a perspective, a way of looking at things. I feel like this is a trick argument in and of itself, but it's mostly just having a claim and supporting it, and that will lead us into the second part of the CER, the claim evidence reasoning, where you do have background information. You give context to your argument and how you go about rationalizing that. So a lot of what we think about when we say making an argument or having a good argument has to do with both facts and rationality when applying those facts.
Good now.
Jessica, Ryan, Bonnie, Jason, what would you say? What do you say an argument is?
I think that the point is, well taken with the getting into the heat of stuff with claims, evidence, reasons. But I mean, argument, simply put, is just a set of premises that logically lead to a conclusion, and the conclusion being, the main claim or something. How to get there, though, is the real discussion. I think that talking more, and I guess we're going to get to this in a bit, about the body of an argument, is where all of the actual work is done, right? All the rhetorical work is being done. So if you were to go back to this main claim thing and think about it in terms of a math problem, I know this analogy is used often, right? Where the main claim is what all the subclaims and the rest of it equals to. So going back to this idea of taking stock of what's happening in the body paragraphs of a paper is actually really useful, because all that stuff leads up to the main claim. So all of those things added up equal the main claim. So there's that.
I was going to give a much more simplistic answer. I think an argument is just anything that someone can disagree with, right? If there's a way to disagree, if I say, this is a phone, I don't know. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure anyone could. Well, okay, I can think of many arguments, actually. So, sure, this is a phone, someone might say. I will agree with you about that. However, I disagree. I wouldn't say it's just a phone. I would say that it's a smartphone. It has all these other capabilities, that we're all familiar with outside of what is traditionally conceived of as the function of a telephone. And so I think, with almost every statement that we make, there's ways to make an argument, or to say that everything that we say can be, argumentative. So now as I'm talking, I'm thinking every sentence I'm saying someone could disagree with me about. But I think that that's actually really true in life. If you pay attention, argument isn't about saying, no, I think you're wrong. It's more about saying, I see this in a slightly different way. Let me explain to you how my vision is a bit different.
See, I would argue you're holding a computer, but we don't have to have that argument right now.
That's right.
But I do think it's worth pointing out that it has a lot to do with who your target audience is. One audience's descriptive paper could be another audience's argument. And so it depends on what the sort of shared premises and like baseline assumptions are for that target audience. For example, in my classes, in face-to-face classes, I would often show that clip of Monty Python with the argument. What do you call it? I don't even know how to describe that well. The guy, pays for an argument and goes in, and the person eventually just starts to contest everything that he says, and he says, "This isn't an argument." And the other person says, "I have to take a contrary position if we're going to have a debate." And then he finds himself wanting more and leaves, and it gets, progressively sillier, of course. But if you're just thinking about sort of like claims, reasons, and evidence, it is possible to write a descriptive paper which still supports itself and is organized and so forth. But if you're simply describing the topic, someone who is in a research audience that already knows all of that will find it, not something that's going to be creating new knowledge. Jessica, are you there? Is that?
She says she can't hear. Yeah.
Well, then she can't hear me here either. Sorry, Jessica.
Yeah, and just to jump onto that, I'm going back to Bonnie's point too. The idea of people disagreeing with you is an important thing, right? They can only disagreement being something beyond just saying no, that's wrong. Reasonably disagreeing with someone based on what they're trying to do. That shows that the claim is worthy of dispute, right? So it's precise enough to actually care about saying no. Here's why I believe that's wrong. Here's a different perspective on why that's wrong. So this is actually a way to gauge how well you're crafting a thesis and supporting your argument.
Yeah, but I think it's also worth pointing out that both Philip and Bonnie have done this too. It's not that you want to find the 180-degree opposite of whatever the position is as you imagine who's going to contest your claim. It's just that you want to come up with something ambitious enough that someone's going to be like, well, I don't know that I completely agree with what you're saying, even though I like where you're going and I have some confidence that you're going to be able to support that.
Right.
That I think is what we're aiming for.
Sorry. Yeah, I think the completely part is the important thing to latch onto, right? Because it's not that someone's just going to starkly disagree with everything you're saying. This debate, organization is something that none of these papers should be doing, right? Yes, no, pro, con. We've talked about that at length. So. Yeah.
Or if you're imagining yourself writing to a room of assholes, then why did you do that? You could imagine yourself writing to a group of very friendly people who are, quite willing to accept a reasonable argument.
Right.
It's a better way to live.
Right.
So
And
one of the best. Sorry.
one of the things that I talk to students about in face-to-face classes that I haven't talked to my students about in the online class is when they're crafting their claim too, to use sort of hedge words sometimes instead of saying everybody should believe this or this is always the case. If you craft your claim to say one way of looking at something or this may be a better alternative, so that your language, because you especially if your claim represents sort of an alternative way of looking at something, you have to make sure that your language is careful and you're not sort of assuming to make this broad claim that that a lot of people would disagree with. So thinking about the kind of language and using words like may or some or in some cases is really important sometimes because it's that way you're not promising or you're not in a certain way. You're hedging a little bit and saying that this is one alternative. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point too, and something that I haven't gotten around to talking to. And we can do it. It's great to think about in terms of your main claim, but it's great to think about just in terms of basic sentence, structuring a basic sentence. In that, sometimes a hedge is limiting. A hedge always limits the statement that you're making. Sometimes it's doing that by saying, some people believe, or generally people think this, but other times it's often done by using words just like often, right? And saying that something is often the case, as opposed to if you say that it is the case that like blah 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 blah, you're saying it's always true. But by putting the word often in there, it is often the case. You hedge the statement, you limit it by telling your reader that there's always a to it. And so it's a really good, hedges are a great tool to use all the time in all of your writing. And you already do. We all use them in our speaking and our writing, but it's great to be aware of it and to use them in a conscientious way.
Yes. On the other hand, don't overuse it because then it sounds like you don't believe anything. I also admire a voice that is confident and bold, provided that assertion can be supported.
Right.
And have you guys talked to your students about not implicating the researcher within the research? Like a lot of the sentences we come across that could start, as you guys have been explaining it, go with like I thought or I feel. How do you feel like remedying that? Like those are things we deal with like every day.
Well, what do you all say about that?
I'm not using I believe or I feel as hedge words. I'm using words like Jessica was saying, often, or in some cases, or assertion about something, or offer some, like when students are trying to offer solutions. There are numerous solutions out there. So for students to just assertively say it's the best solution, in some cases that's maybe very true, and that they should use that kind of authoritative statement. But when students aren't sure that it's the best solution, but it's one that they really believe in, they can use a hedge word, or they can say, the idea that people should consider, or that policymakers need to consider, or one alternative solution is. So the idea, I don't really think that it's important for students to say I feel and I believe, because I tell students, obviously, if you feel and believe things, you can write them assertively in the paper because it's your argument, So I guess I don't think I believe and I feel are hedges, although I think probably students use them that way in some ways because they feel like they don't have the authority to say something, so they feel like they need to tack on I believe or I feel. And I think that's what Jason was saying. We want students to feel authoritative enough, especially after doing the research they've done. That's why we ask them to spend so much time researching, is that they do feel like they know enough about the topic that they can make assertive claims when they need to make them.
So Tyler, Sarah, Philip, Ryan sort of hinted at, or suggested that you point out, like how do you respond to that? But I'd also be interested in hearing if there are kind of common problems that you see for students that are struggling with argumentative writing.
Yeah, one of the things that I often do in my consultations when I see people making statements that are authoritative when they really shouldn't be is asking them if it's always the case that this is happening, and they're like, well, no, not always, and then they kind of acknowledge that they need to soften the language a little bit. And one of the things I really like to do is introduce ways to explain like that this is more likely the case, or this is probably the case, or this is a good solution because, like, introducing new ways to think about phrasing as far as just saying, oh, this is blank, saying this is blank in most situations or in these types of situations. And so getting them to be a little more nuanced. I often find that very enjoyable in consultations myself.
And I try to encourage students to kind of look at where their current research has directed them. If they're looking at how often and what is being said, they kind of glean what is important to note that way. I think that's really kind of where you want to stick with a paper, but of course, you guys are the instructors, so.
And yeah, it's really great to just have these conversations with your students or with your consultees, because just framing, a lot of those hedges help you frame your argument and what scope are you taking and how is it going to be applied. And that's a really good way to start your sentences by saying, you know, often, however, sometimes. And then you can even say, if you want to be more assertive, under these conditions or according to this research, or you just find different ways in which you can frame a theory that is assertive as opposed to just being assertive.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
So it frames the overall logical argument. It also frames the sort of rhetorical contract that you establish with the reader. So for example, if you want to, I mean, we can all make decisions to come across as a certain type of person. I will come across as a prudent, reasonable person who limits, you know, some of these statements and doesn't make these incredibly, you know, unsupportable assertions left and right. But that's another way of saying I want to establish within, you know, like the first paragraph or two of my paper some, you know, a sense of myself that will allow my reader to trust that if he or she continues with however many words are in my document, they can have a reasonable expectation that I'll prove myself by the end of it. And when we get to the portion of this discussion where we talk about how the multimodal aspects of the inquiry project might, you know, find their way in here, I think we can also have those like the double contract, the logical one and the rhetorical one, be established even before people start reading. Just the look of the website or
Yes.
the page or whatever it is can also establish, you know, here is someone who has thought this through and they have figured out how to present their findings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then just one other thing that I like to add is that since all the students who are in UNIV200 have either placed out of or gone through the 111, 112 sequence, I always like to go back to the quantitative reasoning section, which a lot of people feel like, you know, was never really important. But I explain to them, like, when it's something where it's just over 15%, you know, you can say a majority. If it's where it's like 90%, you can say in most cases. And so you can, like, really start to look at, okay, how often does this occur, and explain it in the most accurate terms. And so I always like to go back to that, because then they, like, tend to remember, and they're like, oh, it's all starting to make sense now, and it comes full circle.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's good.
We should have a scale of something like if it happens 10 to 15% of the time, then it's like barely ever, and if it's 20%, then you can say seldom, and if it's like 40 to 60%, you say comme ci, comme ça, and if you should come up with that.
It depends on how many words you're comfortable using will determine how much you can break down that scale.
Okay.
So maybe this is a good time to segue once again just a little bit and let the Writing Center consultants talk a little bit about the claim, reason, evidence formula that we all use and show you a couple examples.
Yeah, so basically what the claims, evidence, reasoning formula is first you have your main claim or even your subclaim depending on how you're going to go about this project. And the evidence is obviously your research, what you're going to use to back up that claim. And then further, your reasoning is the analysis, your rhetoric around why does this support that, basically. I think Tyler has the paragraphs pulled up. We could show an example.
Yeah, no problem. And one of the biggest things about the CER is that a lot of students just forget to put evidence in it. They just write it like straight off of what they've learned, and they don't understand how they can reference back what they've learned and how they learned it. And that way you can show a tertiary research source. So these are two. Everyone can see what I have here on the screen with these two paragraphs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so these are two paragraphs right now that the one at the top is written without CER, and the one at the bottom is with CER. And I don't know if you guys want to read through it real fast, but I'll just point out a few things. Usually the first sentence here needs to have a claim or an argument, or it needs to really stick out with what it's trying to say. And this is, your first sentence really does frame the rest of your paragraph. So here you can see where that's done right here. But while daughters innocently copy their mothers, they also learn rules about body image and its significance. So we know that's the most important thing about what she's going to be going into within this second paragraph here. Whereas in the first paragraph, I don't think we really figure out what she's trying to say, other than war is bad, war is a major issue, but we don't know so much as to how or why she wants to address this issue. See, I'm still looking for a claim here, and this is the thing, is like a lot of people, if they just write off the top of their head, especially if they're really caught up in the passion of what they feel like they want to write, they can forget that they need to have a very solid point that ties everything together and that sticks to the bigger ideas. So yeah, I think most of this is just talking about how badly war can affect the family. Where if she would have said the American militia has been in Iraq for over 5 years now, and that has impacted American families. And then you can talk about all the ways that it's affected American families. Where what you can see the way. So that's your claim. Those were both the claims for these paragraphs. And I feel like if I'm talking too much, you can interrupt me or say whatever you want to about that. But moving on to evidence here, there really isn't a lot of evidence here. It's a lot of just conjecture. Like, she's just saying all these things about within the first paragraph about how it affects the families. Now thousands of families have been destroyed and lost their loved members, but here we have evidence right within the second sentence.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Even using a direct, no, this is not a direct quote, but this is the way you would do the in-text quoting the source. So this is the author right here, and then this is the overall work that she's referencing from. So this is the evidence that she's pointing out. And if you go back and check what Lisa Druxman had to say, it would be in line with what she says here. As a result, notes Druxman, the young daughters, and see, this is a direct quote, and you can see the in-text citation right there. So in a lot of ways, this is how you would want to introduce your research and your evidence, and that's like about the middle of the paragraph there. So you can see that there really isn't even any in-text citations here. So a lot of this was just probably the author's ideas about the American war in Iraq, whereas this one quotes to Druxman about her direct quote within the issue of body image and its significance.
And further, you can see the reasoning following that, right, Tyler?
Yeah, I was just
about how
going to
a
get
mother
that.
presents. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like I said, and you can see this model just work all the way through. It's very fluid and it's very natural. So again, like they set the framework within the first sentence, they tell you the argument, they move on to the evidence, and then here we are at the reasoning section, the R and CER. And yeah, it just says all the ways in which it's influential. And I think I just deleted something, sorry. Okay, and then so some might argue, and this is your counterclaim. However, the research suggests And then you see there's just so many different ways you can reason out an argument, and that's where a good author really shines, because by this last sentence here, we're going to have another thought that will tie back to the main claim made at the beginning of the sentence, and that's really going to stick out when it comes to rhetoric, like why you should believe something based on the argument that I'm making for something. And that's a big thing about like being assertive, is having your argument and then being able to reason it out properly. Is there a lot of things that you deal with, Sarah, when people are trying to rationalize their arguments that you run into?
Yeah, actually my favorite thing is when people aren't really quite sure if their reasoning makes sense. So it's that analysis that we talked about before. And typically what happens with writers that we encounter is that they are using something called writer-based prose, which is when you have your claim and your evidence and you know that the reasoning makes sense. It makes sense in your head when you wrote it, but when you go back to read it maybe a day or two later, or when a second person reads it, it doesn't quite draw that line that you're looking for. And so we like to move it into something called reader-based prose, which is meant for a more general reader. And that's just, that can be as easy as coming and visiting us and reading through it and talking through your paper or your reasoning, or even just setting it down for a day or two and then coming back to it with fresh eyes.
Exactly, and a lot of the writers end up writing themselves into better writing, and we call this writing to discovery. So in a lot of ways, you can just move around a few sentences and restructure your paragraphs, and it'll come with the main point, and then everything backing up that main point, as opposed to writing into something that backs the main point. So your audience is clearly aware of what you're talking about because you assert it, and then you rationalize what it is that you just asserted.
And sometimes using that reorganization can make your paper stronger. I know, as Jessica mentioned earlier, sometimes your thesis kind of develops as you write, and sometimes your first subclaim is not going to be the strongest, you know, a week or two into the paper. So it's important to make sure that you're paying attention to that and constantly reading through it to ensure that it makes the most sense and it makes the best sense.
So yeah, you guys have any questions about how we help students in the writing process?
Well, I just want to maybe clarify something, because I think this is a useful discussion. I think it helps mostly for me kind of at the micro level, like, you know, what does a good paragraph look like? But there's also this kind of macro argumentation thing, and I don't want students to think that they should produce, you know, 20 paragraphs that all look like that. This, for me, is helping students understand kind of a general logic behind an argument, which is you have a claim, you have a reason for making that claim, and then you have certain evidence for supporting it. At the more macro level, there are a lot of ways to convey your overall argument. And so maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
Maybe you should talk a little bit more about that, John. Give us an example of what you mean.
Well, I mean, so for me, in a 3,000, 4,000 word argument, there are a lot of ways to get from beginning to end. Maybe infinite ways. I don't know, but I don't want, for me, I don't want my students thinking there's one formula for getting this all done, right? So anecdotes might come into play. I mean, so I worked with a lot of students writing dissertations, and they have a kind of this traditional 5-chapter dissertation. By the way, it's hard to use air quotes in Hangouts, but you gotta get your fingers into the screen there. Okay. So the 5-chapter dissertation, and there's this introduction where there's certain things supposed to be there, and for me it leads to really boring formulaic writing. And so if you look at my dissertation, for example, it's still 5 chapters, but in the beginning I start with this sort of anecdote that effectively begs the question that I end up answering. And so my point being that I think there are ways to be creative in making an argument, and not necessarily formulaic all the way through. And that creativity can happen in lots of ways throughout an entire piece. But I think, from the 3,000-foot level, the point should be there is an overall logic to this, right? Whatever claims you do make ought to be supported with reasons and evidence, but it shouldn't be claim, reason, evidence, next paragraph, claim, reason, evidence, next paragraph, claim, reason, evidence. For me, that I don't know, that's a little bit boring and formulaic.
I totally understand where you're coming from, and that's one of the things that really does illustrate a good writer, and the fact that when they do make their claims, they can make them whenever they want to in their writing, and that when they're asserted in the proper format and timing. Also, we find a lot of writers that all they're doing is making claims. They aren't providing any evidence or reasoning. So, yeah, just knowing, if anything, especially when we deal with APA papers, it seems that like all the claims start at the beginning, then you have all the evidence, and the very end of it is when you're actually starting to rationalize what that can mean. So this is just a formula to help make an argument and structure a paper. But when you do get into the creative gist of what you're doing, by all means, do not lose your authoritative or your author's voice. Like, don't lose what it means to be an author just because you're sticking to a format. And that's one of the ways I really try to break it up. And a lot of it just has to do with grammar and your transitions between paragraphs. Like, for a lot of my writing, it's still, I stick to a thesis or a main claim, and then I have a lot of subclaims that come after that. And those subclaims, in and of themselves, are their own world. I can make an entire paper about some of my subclaims. But as long as I figure out how I'm going to format that and how I'm going to transition, I'll have stronger writing regardless of whether or not I keep to the CER method.
I mean, this can also manifest itself in themes of the way you discuss it, or revisiting an anecdote later in the paper. It just really depends on your student. I know several UNIV instructors during the semester like to get their students thinking about their main topic and how it's like personal to them, and we've seen that be the beginning of their traditional paper. So maybe a brainstorming activity that way will maintain an authorial voice. It's not so dry.
Well, I think one way, maybe this is a segue, but one way that we're going to not make, one way that we're working against making the paper dry is this will be a multimodal text. So maybe we need to kind of transition into, or talk a little bit about how other media and links and images can really work to help students create a compelling argument.
Yeah, Bonnie, thanks for bringing. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Thanks for bringing that up. I actually have some memes here that will illustrate ways in which we can make an argument. So I'm going to screen share those now.
Okay.
So this is a South Park meme, and the basic thing is that you assert something at the top and you say you're going to have a bad time. So if you don't have evidence to support your claims, you're going to have a bad time rationalizing an argument. And just seeing that picture, again, you understand the context based on pop cultural references. Here's another one with SpongeBob, the overarching claim, making sense of every claim made after it. So you can even imagine like what would be the main claim within the entire argument you're making. And then here's the last one. A lot of people like the Velociraptor. So a lot of what he tries to do is contradict himself within making a statement. So if my paper doesn't have a main claim, then how am I to make subclaims to support it? So within memes, you can actually assert some things, like especially when it comes to making an argument or seeing things from a certain perspective with an image that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do like in a real quick GIF. There's plenty of other ways in which you can use multimedia, especially with what you guys are doing. I think it's great what you guys are doing. So, but that's just my little example of what I thought it would help.
So as we're thinking about multimodal writing, let's just talk for a moment as the instructors of this course to our students about what we're imagining that these inquiry projects might look like. And then when I say look, I mean literally, how might they look visually on the page? I know, a general answer to that would be that it's not going to just be text, right? The text is very important, obviously, but that we're going to use, we're going to try to use a lot of images, whether they're still images, video, and any other kind, or sound images even, to try to supplement the argument, the textual argument that we're making. And so I'm curious to hear from you guys, what advice we might give to our students about how to best function in this multimodal environment, and how we can all as writers best use images in our writing.
Well, I'll start from the bigger perspective, bigger kind of media perspective, not just images and or video, but there was a mention earlier about, maybe Ryan mentioned it, about the overall look and feel of the housing itself. I know Ryan has used that word. I've used the word platform. Whatever platform housing technology our students use, whether it's WordPress, whether it's Wix or Weebly or Tumblr, but we could talk about whether we like Tumblr as a platform for this or not. You want to make sure that the overall feel of the site itself, the page, the house itself, works for your argument. So you don't want it to just be pretty. You don't want it to be just cool looking or modern. You want it to actually emphasize or reinforce your argument. So let me just share my screen here quickly. I do that. Screen share is where? At the top? Here we go.
Yeah.
Here we go. All right, so do you see the Sports Illustrated article there now?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, so this is the Sports Illustrated has these long-form articles, which are really fantastic, fantastic writing. And I picked this one for a couple of reasons. This is, A, because it is actually, I would say, an argument, and B, aesthetically, it's just fascinating. Now, I will be the first to admit that I tend to throw out examples that are way out there and probably not attainable for our students. But hey, if you can get to this level, congratulations, A+ for you. But this is an argument about how this particular basketball game saved college basketball as we know it. That it was kind of dying in popularity, but this game kind of brought it back to life. And so they make that argument. So it's worth reading for that. But also you'll notice as I scroll through here, they have this kind of old school aesthetic throughout. And so along the right side here, they have these images in kind of old film technology looking way. And then they have the old ticket up there, and all throughout, when you get down to the pictures, they've put this kind of graininess into the pictures, which I'm pretty sure are not necessarily in the images, but they've added to it because it adds to this overall kind of old school 1980s feel to it. Here, even in the video, they added a kind of layer of graininess to the video to add to the overall aesthetic. All throughout, as I scroll through, you see that kind of thing. So this is just one really good example, in my opinion, of using all of the media and the whole kind of platform to help advance this argument about this experience in the past that shapes what we know in the future. Similarly, here's another Sports Illustrated long-form article about this indigenous tribe in the Brazilian Amazon that plays soccer, and how they're kind of trying to make their way in the sport of soccer. And soccer is known throughout the world as the beautiful game. And this indigenous tribe uses lots of color in their culture. And so what I think they've done well in this particular article is they brought a lot of color and vibrancy and beauty into this article about the beautiful game. So as you scroll down, you start to see they've got colors all throughout, color scheme throughout. They have a Brazilian theme because it's about this tribe in Brazil. All the pictures are really very colorful and beautiful. Right, so you get this really general sense of beauty and color about a sport that's considered beautiful and colorful in a tribe that uses lots of colors in their culture. So to me, those are two good examples. Clearly, high-level examples, but I think they, they make the point, at least for me, that it's important to think about the overall look and feel of your house that you're writing in addition to the media, which we can talk about in a bit. Oops, didn't want to do that. All right, I'm done screen sharing.
So I think one of the best things we can do as consultants here is actually look over what the students are doing within WordPress, not only as they're typing it, but what does the finished product look like. Let's pull up that screen ourselves. So I have one I shared yesterday, and I think it'll stick out to. So this is kind of what they look like, right? This is a lot of what the post will look like. Will the final project look like this as well? Be in this format?
Well, that's a post. I'm encouraging my students not to do their inquiry projects as a post because blog posts tend to be shorter. If they want to use the same site that they've been using for their blogs, they can do that, but what I would encourage them to do is to create a new page and have the project be on that page. Then they have kind of a blank canvas to work from. And they're free to do that. They're free to start a whole new Rampages site. So if your site right now is rampages.us/jbecker for the purposes of the course, for your project you might just go. It's very easy to add a new site. You just create a new site. You might call it, if you're doing your project on something around euthanasia, you might say rampages.us/euthanasia and just start a whole new WordPress-based site. So that you have a little bit more flexibility to go from there. But okay. Tyler, to your point, I think and this earlier came up about having the students share their work as a Google Doc for their work with the Writing Center. I think it'd be even better if the students could say, share their screen with you and say, here's what it's looking like so far in Wix or WordPress or Weebly, so that you can not just see the words, but also see the context of the argument on the platform in which it will live.
I think someone had mentioned perhaps sharing the link with us so we could look at it on our screen and explore it for what it is as well.
And I guess one of the biggest things we'd be looking for is that they just don't assert an image or a GIF or a video without it actually having merit, having a value to the argument itself. Memes kind of rationalize themselves, but just an image itself, we don't understand what the context of that image and how that actually adds to the overall argument. So I think just understanding why the thing is there as we're reading will help them talk, out rationalizing why they put it there in the first place.
I agree, and I'm really glad you said that, Tyler. I think there's a way in which I think all of our students would get demoralized or feel demoralized if we were to tell them that the multimodal aspects of the project would act as a sort of shorthand that would allow them to write less. I mean, it actually is an opportunity to say more, because you'll have to, as with any sort of chart or graph or anything that we would put into a traditional sort of publication, you don't just plop it in there and then expect the reader to know exactly what to do with its data. You still have to work that in with reasoning. And I think the same thing would be true of any sort of video or an image or something like that. A good document would convey very strongly what the rationalization for why that media is present.
And also, I mean, just to jump onto that, using media is a really good way of not just adding length for adding length's sake, but to keep the focus of the argument precise and bringing in primary data to unpack and analyze. I mean, so having the ability to just plug stuff in, embed things, and just pick it apart is really useful to gather things that will enhance the argument itself.
Can I just interject there and talk? Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. Sorry, because it's really fuzzy on my end. Something Ryan just said just reminded me of something I've been trying to talk to my students a lot about all semester. So maybe just for a second, if we can chat about it. And that is the choice that we make as writers and designers when we decide whether we are going to embed a link or embed an image or embed a video versus just providing, here's the link to the YouTube video. I've been thinking a lot about that this semester in terms of my own writing, but also while looking at my students' writing and thinking about how how much more motivated I am as a reader when a video, for example, is embedded in the page as opposed to just a link. You know, here's a link to my video, and then I have to click it and go to another page to watch it. I've been thinking a lot about how much more motivated I am as a reader to, you know, watch that video or to look at an image if it is embedded. But I've also been trying to think, are there times when we might not want to embed something in our writing, and it might be a better choice to actually, you know, is it preferable at a certain times to provide a link as opposed to embedding? You guys have any thoughts on that? I don't know if it is.
I think that's right. And actually, what's interesting, I think I knew about this, but not as much as I did yesterday, because Molly Ranson, who's our media specialist, was she is most responsible for the Do You Want to Build a Straw Man video that we've been sharing around. And she was horrified because I put in a blog post, and when you embed it, as Jessica said, you see kind of a still image of it, which is called the thumbnail. And turns out on YouTube you can actually tell it which thumbnail you want, and she hadn't done that. And she was very unhappy with the thumbnail, and so it didn't look particularly good in my post. And so I think if you're choosing to embed a video, further to Jessica's point, whatever thumbnail that video comes with actually ends up being pretty important. Because if there's a person in the video and they're smiling. Yeah, go ahead, Bonnie.
No, I've learned the same thing. I don't know how to change the thumbnail. I need to get Molly to help me with that. But I've taken, when I do these weekly updates, I've decided just to put the link because I don't like the thumbnail. So, yeah, I get that. That's interesting.
Because it often captures you with your face, and you look like, that's the first face that you have. And I accidentally did that sorry, Miriam, if you're watching, because I tried to feature your work on the front of our course site, and the picture of that's the snapshot in your video, and it's not, the best image of you, as pretty as you could be. So that would be lovely if we could all learn. Maybe, Don, you could send all the faculty some instructions about how to choose a thumbnail, and we could share that with our students individually.
I will ask Molly to do that.
Or Molly, yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
So let me try and make another point, which is I think most of us are thinking of this in terms of kind of a single web page where the reader has to kind of scroll down from top to bottom. And I just want to throw out the idea that there are lots of possibilities for this. A writer could certainly think of creating an argument that goes over the course of several pages. There might be a WordPress theme that is particularly good for that kind of argument. But again, it ought to be purposeful. Like if that's what you're doing, there might be a reason why you're having the reader kind of click from page to page. And so that's one of kind of many possibilities. I also threw out in the Thought Vectors Twitter stream the other day a link to an article about an author who was writing kind of a story, and I think he wrote 280 tweets to write a story. And it got me thinking about could you create an effective 3,000-word argument, 140 characters at a time in Twitter? And I actually think you could. You could even create, where you want to have a link to to an article that you're referencing. You could certainly include that in a tweet as well. So it's a little bit kind of out there and wild, but I could absolutely imagine developing a long-form argument through Twitter, and even if you wanted to, you could then maybe even just use something like Storify.com to bring all the tweets together, and then you can kind of break it up and insert some narrative where you wanted to insert it. Again, I wouldn't do it just to do it, but if you think it helps make your argument, it's just another possibility. And so I guess it's more to my point about creativity. Creative writing is not mutually exclusive from argumentative writing. We can do both. We can accomplish some creativity while still making a persuasive argument.
Yeah, in fact, I would add on to that to say I think some of the most creative, as someone who studied English my whole life, I think some of the most creative writing I've ever produced has been argumentative writing. And I think that some of the times that I felt most creative, that mood you feel in when you feel like you're really producing good work, I think that's happened to me more with argumentative writing than it has, or at least as much as it has when I've produced short stories and things like that, that are more traditionally creative pieces. Because I think that there is so much, writing a strong argument and truly being persuasive is about being creative. You can't just say what you think. You've got to find ways to persuade your audience and get them to subtly agree with the points that you're making. So I think argumentative writing is extremely creative. And just going back to something we were saying, reason evidence formula, one thing I ask my students to do when we talk about that in my class is to find a paragraph that doesn't use that formula, that doesn't use that. And I'm not saying, of course there's a few sentences here and there that don't, but when you look at a novel, for example, or when you look at a piece of writing in Sports Illustrated, or a piece of writing in a peer-reviewed article, or pretty much most kinds of sustained long pieces, you will find that paragraphs typically begin with a sentence that does map out what's going to happen in that paragraph. But that shouldn't mean that it's not creative, right? If you just say, here's my claim, here's my reason, here's my evidence, that's really boring. No one wants to read that. But there are ways to be extremely creative, and I think that that's the challenge, or what I would challenge all my students to do, are find ways to insert your own voice and to be creative with the words you use and your sentence structure and the placement of the evidence and the way that you use your evidence to get your points across.
I totally agree. And there's some consultations I have where I wish I had like an audio recorder with me, because you're just talking, and then what they say, if they could write down everything they just said, they would really capture the thoughts that would help support those arguments in a very creative way. And that was just through having a conversation about their writing. And that's our basic philosophy here at the Writing Center, is that by talking about your writing, by having a conversation, it will get better.
Mm-hmm. But that's a good rationale for doing it on the Google Doc as well, because then they have that record at the end of it.
That's a good point.
Yeah, let me just a little bit more to the point about the platform, the overall look and feel. So I just want to throw out a bit of advice / caution to folks that are watching now, probably both of you, and to those who will watch this later, which is that we're getting down. We have, after this week, you have basically a week and a half to do this, and for a lot of the students, the technology part of it is going to be brand new, and it's the same problem I have with dissertation advisees working in Microsoft Word. It's like they leave the formatting to the end, thinking, "Oh, I just need a day to do the formatting, and it'll be fine." And then they end up with so many technology problems and fighting with Microsoft Word. Fighting with Microsoft Word for twice as much time as they thought they would. So I'm really going to sort of suggest to the students not to leave the technology part of it to the end, especially because if you're trying to make this work for your argument, maybe the choice of platform ought to be kind of sooner rather than later. So for a couple of reasons, please don't leave the technology part of it to the end, because I think it's going to cause problems, but it's also going to limit what ends up available to you.
Right. Yeah, thinking about all this stuff cohering, gets back to a lot of the points that we've been making. Going back to Jessica's point about creativity, this is the license to be creative, right? We're not saying don't be that unless it directly pertains exactly to an argument, because this thing is more than just the bare bones bullet list of an argument. As Jason said earlier, it's a contract with the reader. So everything you're doing enhances the thing you're doing in some way, either with the argument itself logically or the rhetorical interaction you have with the reader. So think about this thing holistically rather than just saying, I'm going to write this thing out, I'm going to figure out where to go with it, I'm going to figure out what images to put in this thing. As best as possible, think about all these things as cohering components.
We've gone a little bit past the 5 o'clock mark, so I want to respect everyone's time. Since this is our opportunity to let the Writing Center shine, any parting words from our Writing Center folks?
Come early, come often.
Yeah.
Like voting in Chicago, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I know you already said it at the beginning, but do you want to just really briefly tell them again what to do to make their appointments?
Yes, so if you're local, you can just walk right over to the building at 1000 Floyd Avenue and come visit us during business hours, which is Monday through Thursday, 12 to 6. Or you can call us during those hours if it's inconvenient for you to come over at 804-828-4851.
And I'll
What
add.
about if they're not local?
They
What
would
about
still need to call the number and schedule an online appointment and tell the receptionist that they need an online appointment.
Okay.
And if you do come to the physical facility, the writing center, if you make a right off the elevator instead of a left, you'll end up in my office, which is not terrible. So please say hi, and I'll tell you where to go.
4th floor.
Yep.
It's the 4th floor of the building.
Yes, 4th floor.
Okay. So
Well,
thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, take care.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.